Good afternoon. My name is Michael Redmond. I'm the Regulatory Compliance Specialist for Post Oak Savannah Groundwater Conservation District, and I'm here to facilitate this breakout. Our first speaker is Jevon Harding, and she joined the TWDB Groundwater Modeling Group in 2021. Jevon has a BA in Geoscience from Princeton University and an MS in Hydrology from the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. If y'all would, please welcome Jevon to the stage.
Hello? Okay. Hi, this is the second time around, so I guess there's a much smaller crowd. I am a groundwater modeler with the Texas Water Development Board. However, the opinions expressed and the cartoons in this presentation are my own and not those of my employer. Second disclaimer, this presentation is a very general overview of all of our models, so we know you might have questions about individual models or very specific locations. Please email us so that we can give you some more detail about those questions. So starting with the what is groundwater modeling? Essentially, it's a way to represent this super complex, interconnected system as this much less complex stack of boxes. And the benefit of converting all of this continuous information into this is that my computer doesn't understand this, my computer does understand that. And once my computer understands it, I can use it to approximate groundwater flow and give us an idea of what's happening underneath our feet, which without X-ray vision is usually a hard thing to do. So the board is tasked with creating models for all of the major and minor aquifers in the state. So that's 9 major aquifers and 22 minor aquifers. And we do lump sum aquifers and split sum aquifers. So it ends up being close to 30 current models. That's not including old models or alternate models. So it's just a lot of models. The groundwater modeling program, the purpose is to create tools that can be used in the joint planning and in the regional water planning process. To be the most helpful tools for those processes, we do encourage input from stakeholders, and we have public meetings and request information. These models are periodically updated, so if we go back, if you see something like a V2 or a V3, that means it's the second or third iteration of that model. And very importantly to us as a state agency, we want these models to be available for you, the general public. So these are all freely available on our website in case anybody is in need of some light reading. Here you go. So I've noticed when modelers talk about modeling, we tend to focus on the stuff that is very important and super cool and interesting to us, and for some reason, can't imagine why. Those are not always the things that are super cool and interesting to the people who need to use these tools, and we kind of start to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. And when that happens, there's not dialogue with the modelers and the people who need to use these models, and where there's not dialogue, there's not great communication, we have misunderstandings, missed expectations. And so you shouldn't need a degree in hydrogeology to be able to use these tools for your management decisions, but you do need to know enough to ask the right questions from us and to have that dialogue. And so I'm hoping this presentation is a step in the right direction. So since modeling puts everyone to sleep, I'm not going to talk about models, I'm going to talk about tools. Right? So bear with me, I'm only slightly crazy. So we all know tools are specific to the jobs that we need to do. In this conceptualization today, I'm going to talk about our regional groundwater models as hammers. And the reason I thought of this was because of the saying, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And so we have these models, they're across the state of Texas. Sometimes it is the only tool available for certain parts of the state. And so people want to use it to solve problems that we maybe really shouldn't be using our models for. And so we want to give you the context to decide, okay, when is this the right tool for the job? And the follow-up question for that is always, well, if it's not the right tool for the job, why are you bothering to give this to me? Why didn't you give me a screwdriver or a saw in the first place? And so we'd also like to give you some context of why we build our models the way that we do, why we're building these hammers. So, like I said, we are tasked with creating models for all of the major and minor aquifers in Texas. And for us at the board, we have certain things that we need to accomplish with these models. That's what I'll call nails. So one, we need to calculate water budgets for GCD management plans. So that is for every single aquifer, for every single GCD in the entire state of Texas. We also have to calculate modeled available groundwater. That's what feeds into the state water plan. And we need to calculate that again for every single aquifer, for every single GCD, and even more fun, for every single combination of county, region and river basin in the entire state of Texas. So you can see we need tools that help us answer those statewide questions quickly and efficiently. And we spend a lot of our time cranking out these reports. Maybe some of these seem familiar to you if you work in a district. The other thing that we need our models to be able to handle, these are things that are more indirect. I called them tax pegs, whatever. They're not nails, but gee, it makes our lives a lot easier to have that tool to be able to meet those goals. And those are things like legislative requests or amendments where the ledge is asking us for an analysis or study, and we can use those models to meet that. We also know that people want to use our models for other uses, so districts like to be able to run DFC scenarios on these. So one of the things that's important to us is having a tool that's easily to transfer. So if your friend borrows a hammer, you don't have to give them a hammer user's manual, right? They probably know how to use it. So to make our models more accessible, we do build them using ModFlow programs. This is open source software from the USGS. It's a federal agency. They're great at documentation. They update it pretty regularly. It is free, which is always good. And you may not have heard of it, but I guarantee you, if you talk to any hydrologist in the room, they have heard of it. They know how to use it. It's easy to transfer to them. And I do bring this up because, you know, whenever I talk to academics or researchers or people who are smarter than me, you know, there are new models coming out all the time, and we get asked why we stick with ModFlow. And it comes down to, you know, we want our models to be useful and accessible to the state. So ModFlow, we know, runs on most computers. It doesn't require specialization. Lots of documentation so people can QA us. It's not black box. And then districts and GMAs and the public can easily use these tools. They're transferable. And we know that they're flexible enough to use for all of Texas. Some models really work really well in local areas, but do not work at the regional scale that we want. Or they might be optimized for very specific aquifers or geologic conditions. So we can't use it across the state. Another thing about our models, they are meant to cover entire aquifers. And the reason I'm equating aquifers to GMAs is I just always like to remind people of this. Our groundwater management area boundaries are not arbitrary. They are drawn specifically to try to be as close to major aquifer boundaries as possible. So you'll notice GMA 6 is the Seymour, GMA 8 is the Northern Trinity. And the reason for this is that aquifers don't end at a county or district line. And they're one interconnected system. So if we want to talk about the aquifer as a whole, as it is, we need to have a way to do that, and we do that through the GMA system. And the regional models are meant to be one tool that can be used for the entire aquifer or GMA so that we don't have conflicting tools. So let's talk about GCDs. Our GMAs are built around aquifer boundaries. GCD boundaries do not have to follow aquifer or GMA boundaries. And you'll notice in some of our GMAs or aquifers, we have these huge blank spaces where there are no districts at all. And GMAs are the basis for our joint planning, right? Talking about the aquifer as a whole, but a GMA is not a physical entity. It's made up of individual GCDs. And each GCD is, working on their own local issues. They're all in the same aquifer, same neighborhood, but have different focuses. And so joint planning on the aquifer or GMA level would be really difficult without at least some common ground to start from. And so the idea behind the regional groundwater models is to put everyone under the same roof, to provide that common ground for GMAs to really treat the aquifer as one interconnected system and talk about it together. So I took some creative license, This is the TWDB supermodeler, and we've created this giant regional model for everyone, and everyone says, this is exactly what we needed. Crowd goes wild, everyone lives happily ever after, right? Right? No. So let's just talk through some of the reasons why the crowd is not going wild. So one of the main ones is the switch from local focus to this regional aquifer-wide focus. And, for me as a modeler, that's a feature, not a bug, right? I am trying to look at it as a full regional system. But for people who are interested in more local things, there might be some aspects that are missing in that bigger model. So, somebody is complaining, oh, my room has no kitchenette, but I need to be able to cook for myself. Why are you trying to make me use a communal kitchen? And so obviously I don't mean kitchenette. I mean, okay, the model is missing a local feature of concern, whether that's a spring or a subunit of an aquifer or, a sensitive area that either is not included in the regional model, or if it is, it's not at the level of detail that is useful for a local decision. And some of this is communication, right? If you don't tell us about that particular feature of concern, we're not going to include it. But also, this is a worst case scenario, right? We shouldn't get to the end of the modeling process and have somebody realize that, oh, that's not included, right? Hopefully, you would have participated in this process and let us know that this was something you wanted, or we would be able to tell you, why it's not. And that's the second part of the communication, is just making sure we let you know what the limitations of the model are. Because, and this is the answer that people don't usually want, but sometimes the regional model is not the right tool to answer that question, right? That doesn't mean it's a bad tool, doesn't mean we have to tear down that house, right? It's working for me, it's helping me do my job. Most of the other districts or counties are fine with it. It's just, if you need that particular feature to be able to make your local management decisions, then the regional model might not be the tool for you. And our recommendation in that case is, okay, maybe you need to start looking at a local model that can give you the detail you want on that feature of concern. You can work with consultants, or some folks have in-house district staff to do that. Another major thing about our groundwater models that I like to point out is these are big, big aquifers we're talking about. Some of them are, like what, a fifth of the state of Texas? And so when we have big aquifers, we have giant models. And in order to get useful information out of those models, we need to start making decisions based on computational limits, right? Our computers can only handle so much, and data limits, right? Like where do we have data on this aquifer? So the way that we handle computational limits is one of the ways is simplification. And simplification is maybe a hard sell, a little hard to understand, because people look at this system, you know, it's very complicated, has all these bits and pieces, and then see this and say, how could that possibly be a good model for this system? It doesn't look anything like it. And I would say it depends on what you're trying to do. So in our case, we only care about groundwater. So this set of Lego blocks is all of this, but only the pieces that directly affect or relate to groundwater, right? So if I'm trying to answer groundwater questions, it's great. It's not going to answer your questions about, you know, real estate or coastal things or biodiversity, but it's going to answer groundwater questions. And so a good motto in modeling, as in life, is the KISS principle: keep it simple, silly. And just acknowledging that extra complexity does not always mean a better model. It has its place, but you have to focus on, okay, what question do you want answered? Sometimes you don't need a smart fridge. You just need a fridge. Sometimes you don't need the fanciest new smartphone. A flip phone might be fine. And so there is room for complexity, but we have to be intentional about where and when we implement it so that we don't add computational stress. So does adding a detail change how the groundwater acts? If not, don't bother adding it. It's not going to change the answers that you get about what's happening in the groundwater. We may have a cool new package or an interesting parameter to talk about, but nobody cares about it. No one is asking questions about that. So don't bother putting it in. Don't waste that computational space. And then the most important, I think, is this last point. So the way that we make sure our models are good and not just us making stuff up is by comparing our models to real life observations. So if we are trying to model at a detail that we do not have real life data at that detail, then we don't have a way to compare. And then we have to start kind of making stuff up, right? So that actually makes it worse. Like, we added more detail, but it made it worse. So extra complexity by itself does not necessarily mean it's better. It just means it's more complex unless you have a good reason for it. The other decisions we have to make on computational limits is thinking about our resolution. And I'm talking about spatial and temporal resolution. So in our models, we're aiming for less than 1 million cells. Beyond that, starts to slow down a lot, and it's not fun. And that seems like a lot of cells, but we cannot go bigger than 1 mile by 1 mile cells. Otherwise, we can't answer the questions that we need answered. So take some of those huge models, take the square miles, and then multiply that by however many aquifer layers you're putting into your model, anywhere usually from like 3 to 10. So it adds up really quickly. And there might be areas where we do want to put in additional detail if there is a specific feature of concern, but we have to be intentional because every extra cell that we add adds to our computational stress. And the same with our temporal resolution. Every year we add to our model adds to our computational stress. So we try to keep it to annual stress periods. If people need seasonal information, we might consider adding that, especially if there's data. If there's no data, you know, it might not be worth it. And if you're thinking, this is 2023, we live in the future, what are you talking about computational limitations? Like, just add another core to your cluster, get time on a supercomputer, you know, you don't have to simplify anything. So that brings us back to, we want these models to be useful and accessible. So Our models are straightforward to run and calibrate and run on most computers. You don't need a supercomputer. That means districts and GMAs can use these as living, breathing tools. And as I mentioned, we know that we are focused on the questions that we need answered. We know our models can answer those questions. We can add in all that extra detail, but it may not actually improve our answers or help us any more than the normal one. All right, and the last point I want to talk about is calibration. So calibration is the process where we try to get our model to match real life as much as possible, right? If we cannot prove that our model is recreating real life, we're just making stuff up. So we have to compare it to real life data. And the real life data that we have usually for groundwater is water levels measured at wells over time. And, in a perfect world, if the red is our model results, oh, look, we matched it exactly. We do not live in a perfect world, and we have software and computational limitations. So I would say that's a pretty good fit. So how do we get there? And that's the calibration process. All right, so there are certain things that we can tweak about our model to try to get our model to fit real life better. So all of these dials on the side represent things that we can tweak about our model. And so our computer has to go through all the different combinations of that, this at a quarter turn, this at a half turn, this at a quarter turn, and all the different permutations of that. And it goes through and says, okay, this particular combination is the best fit. But you can see how, okay, if we added another dial, all of a sudden you add a whole nother set of combinations that your computer needs to check. So that adds to your computational complexity. And of course, when you add more targets, that adds even more complexity to what your computer needs to check. So in this case, look, we matched all these pretty well. Oh, this one doesn't look so great. Let's see if we can run some more runs and see if we can fit that one better. Oh, look, we fit that one and it messed up everything else. So your computer is basically playing a complicated version of whack-a-mole, trying to get as many targets as possible matched. And as further complexity in our regional models, we're not talking about a couple water levels that we need to match. We're talking about hundreds or thousands that your computer is running all these different simulations and seeing, okay, which is the best fit for the most number of wells. And if we didn't want our computer running and running until it turned into a pile of goo, we need to set a cutoff. And so for us, we say we need errors less than 10%, and that'll be good. The misunderstanding that we sometimes have here is that this is measured across the entire model region. This is not 10% in a particular county or a district. And so you can maybe see where I'm going here. So if I complete this model and my errors are less than 10%, or I'm an awesome modeler, so they're less than 5%. This is such a great model. Somebody is not going to have those calibration statistics. Maybe they're at 20%. And so they're up in the attic, have no space. This house is unlivable, right? Maybe most of their wells matched, but these two are super off, and this is their brother's well, or worse, this is their monitoring well that they need to make their local management decisions. So again, this is a communication issue. Hopefully we wouldn't get to the end of this process and this be a surprise to everyone. Also, hopefully, if you had data that might have helped us calibrate, or had we known that was your monitoring well, we might have tried to optimize for that more. So again, please participate in the process through the stakeholder advisory forums. And part of the communication also needs to be us informing you of the limitations of the model. Because again, the answer that nobody wants is that this might not be the right tool for your particular questions. It's not a bad tool, right? It's working for us to do our checklist at the board. It's working for most of the other counties and districts in your area. But if you need, say, those particular wells to make your local management decisions, we're not going to get that in the regional model. I had my computer playing whack-a-mole forever, and that was as good as we could do. So in that case, we would say, okay, maybe you need to work with a consultant or your district in-house staff to do a more local model, or try another method, maybe some other software to help you out. That's not to say we will never update a model. Obviously, if a lot of districts have issues with it, we're going to need to revisit that model, right? If everyone in this area has problems, we're like, oh, we need to look at that roof. Maybe there's a boundary condition that's weird or something. If more data becomes available or better software becomes available, maybe we can get a better calibration for this model. So those all would be good reasons to update it. But sometimes it's also just not the right tool for the job. So hopefully that's a little bit more context for y'all looking at these regional models and deciding whether this is giving you the answers that you need to do your jobs, and why I'm doing this to do my job. So if you have additional questions, obviously please email us with a lot more detail and information on individual models.
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, here, let me. Yeah, so the people go on.
All right. Back when we were setting up the GMA 9 process, we were utilizing a Hill Country Trinity groundwater model. And what we did, we ran the model in several different scenarios and years and stuff. And through that process, we were able to pick the year 2008 as being the year that the model most closely matched the real data. And that's how we calibrated that model. And we set up 2008 as our baseline year. And is that still a good, valid way to do it? Because we're going to probably be looking at a new model pretty soon. You see what I'm getting at? You're getting all these different correlation curves, and some way you've got to get it as close to reality as possible, I would think.
Right. And we can talk more about this. So the models that I'm talking about here are all historical models.
Okay.
And so they end, like we're not trying to predict.
Oh, it's not a predictive model.
They're not predictive. So
sorry.
that's what we're talking about with the calibration, is we're trying to make sure if I'm building it from 1980 to 2000, I want to then compare it to, we have data from 1980 to 2000, right? That's in the past, so we can double check that model. And hopefully, if we trust the historical model, then we feel okay extending it and saying, okay, we think it's going to match in the future. We're not fortune tellers, but because it matched in the past, we're fairly confident that it's going to match in the future, where we can't check it against real life data.
Okay, yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, let's thank Jevon for her presentation.